Chapter 26 of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Lady Helen Montgomery's Son. When the young people had gone, Mensmore ill at ease, though tremulously happy that Phyllis had so demonstrated her trust in him, Phyllis herself radiantly confident in the barrister's powers to set everything right, Bruce devoted himself to the task of determining a new line for his energies. The first step was self-evident. He must ascertain if the Dykes knew a Colonel Montgomery. He drove to the club frequented by Sir Charles, but the baronet was not there, so he went to Wensley House. Sir Charles was at home, in his accustomed nook by the library fire. He looked ill and low-spirited. The temporary animation he had displayed during the past few weeks was gone. If anything, he was more listless than at any time since his wife's death. "Well, Claude," he said wearily, "anything to report?" "Yes, a good deal." "What is it?" "I want to ask you something. Did you ever know a Colonel Montgomery, or was your wife acquainted with any one of that name to your knowledge?" "I do not think she was. Had she ever met such a man I would probably have heard of him. Who was he?" The baronet's low state rendered his words careless and indefinite, but his friend did not wish to bother him unduly. "The police have discovered," he said, "that Mrs. Hillmer formed a close intimacy with some one whom she designated by that name and rank, though I have failed to trace any British officer who answers to this description. He disappeared, or died, as some people put it, about the same time as your wife." "Is it not known what became of him, then?" "No." "Won't Mrs. Hillmer tell you?" "She absolutely refuses to give any help whatever." "On what ground?" "That is best known to herself. My theory is that a man she loves is implicated in the affair, and she is prepared to go any length to shield him." "Ah." Sir Charles bent over and poked the fire viciously. Then he murmured: "Women are queer creatures, Bruce. We men never understand them until too late. My wife and I did not to all appearances care a jot for one another while she lived, yet now I realize that she loved me, and I would give the little remaining span of existence, dear as life is, to see her once more." This was a morbid subject. The younger man tried to switch him off it. "It is almost clear to me," he said, "that Colonel Montgomery's name was assumed. Few people realize the use of the alias made in modern life. I have a notion that the custom among otherwise honorable people has arisen from the publicity given to the fact that royal and other distinguished personages frequently choose to conceal their identity under less known territorial titles. The idea is ingenious. We are all slaves to fashion. However that may be, it should not be a difficult task to lay hands on the gentleman should he be still living." "Suppose you succeed? How can you connect him with my wife's death?" "At this moment I am unable to say, but the cabman might be of some use." "The cabman? What cabman?" "Did I omit that? I ought to have told you that I have found the driver of the four-wheeler in which your poor wife was taken, dead or insensible, from Sloane Square to Putney." "What an extraordinary thing!" "What is?" "That you should have forgotten to inform me of such a striking fact." "Not so. Now that I recollect, I have not had the opportunity. It was impossible to discuss anything else but that forged letter on the last two occasions we met, and it was only a few hours prior to your visit on Monday that I got the cabman's story fully. By the way, do you now see any reason why Jane Harding should have tried to deceive you in such a manner?" The barrister perceived that Sir Charles was nervous and irritable, so he deemed it a needless strain to enlarge on the history of his discovery of Foxey. "I am tired of letters and plots and mysteries. My life is resolving into one huge note of interrogation. Soon the great question of eternity will dominate all others." Dyke's mood unfitted him for sustained conversation. Bruce could but pity him, and hope that time would calm his fevered brain and soothe the unrest that shed this gloom over him. "Really," said Claude, after a long interval, during which both men sought inspiration from the dancing flames in the fireplace, "really this is too bad of you, Dyke. You showed a marked improvement for a little space, and now you are letting yourself slip back into a state of lonely and unoccupied moping again." "My thoughts find me both occupation and company," was the despondent reply. "There is nothing for it," continued Bruce cheerfully, "but a tour round the world. You must start immediately. A complete change of scene and surroundings will soon pull you back to a normal state of mind and health." "I have been thinking of a long journey for some time past." The barrister glanced sharply at his friend. The double entente was not lost on him. Dyke was in a depressed and nervous condition. The uncertainty regarding his wife's fate was harassing him unduly, and it was with a twinge of conscience that Bruce reflected upon his own eagerness to pursue a quest which, by very reason of its indefiniteness, attracted him as an intellectual pursuit. "Look here," he cried, in the spur of the moment, "I have long desired to see the Canadian Pacific route. Will you arrange to start west with me a fortnight hence? We can return when the spirit moves us." "We will see, we will see. To day I feel unable to decide anything." "Yes, I know, but the mere fact that you take the resolution will serve to reanimate you." "It is very good of you, Claude, to trouble so about me. Had you asked me earlier I might have gone straight away, but let it rest for a little while. When I have recovered my spirits somewhat, I will come to you to ask you to sail the next day or something of the sort." Beyond this, the other could not move him. There was one link in the chain of evidence that would be irrefragable if discovered. Was this Colonel Montgomery in any way connected with the house at Putney where the murderer had disposed of the body? If this could be established, the unknown visitor to Raleigh Mansions would experience a good deal of difficulty in clearing himself of suspicion. Bruce was certain that, once the Colonel was traced, much would come to light explanatory of Mrs. Hillmer's and her brother's dread lest his identity should be discovered. An inquiry addressed to the house agents, to whom possible tenants were referred, elicited the information that the present owner, a lady, was prepared to let the house annually or on a lease. They enclosed an order to view, which Bruce retained in case he should happen to need it. A second letter gave him the address of the lady's solicitors, Messrs. Small and Sharp, Lincoln's Inn. He called on them as a possible tenant, with a desire to purchase the property outright if his proposal could be entertained. Mr. Sharp, the partner who dealt with the estate, became very suave when the suggestion reached his ears. "You will understand, Mr. Bruce, that your request requires some consideration. The rent my client asks is comparatively low, because the house is old fashioned, but the splendid riparian position of the property, a freehold acre on the banks of the Thames at Putney, gives it a highly increased future value. Any figure you might have based on rental calculations would therefore—" "Not meet the case at all," said the barrister, repressing a smile at the familiar opening move in the game of bargaining. "Precisely. May I ask who the present owner is?" "Certainly. The lady's name is Small. In fact, she is my partner's wife. Her father, the late Reverend Septimus Childe, purchased the estate some years ago, largely because the house suited his requirements as the head of a successful private school." "Has the estate changed hands frequently, then?" "Oh dear, no. Indeed, it is well understood that the Reverend Mr. Childe had acquired it more as a friendly transaction than otherwise. The estate is a portion of the separate estate of the late Lady Helen Montgomery, who married Sir William Dyke, father of the present baronet, who perhaps— Good gracious, my dear sir, what is the matter?" Had Bruce been a woman, he must have fainted. As it was, the shock of the intelligence nearly paralyzed him. Sir Charles Dyke, Montgomery, The house at Putney, the property of his mother! What new terror did not this frightful combination suggest? Why did his friend conceal from him these most important facts? Why did he pretend ignorance not only of the locality, but of his mother's maiden name? Like lightning the remembrance flashed through Bruce's troubled brain that he had only heard of the earlier Lady Dyke as a daughter of the Earl of Tilbury. A suspicion, profoundly horrible yet convincing, was slowly mastering him, and every second brought further proof not only of its reasonableness, but of its ghastly and inflexible certainty. Again the lawyer's voice reached his ears, dully and thin, as though it penetrated through a wall. "Surely you feel ill. Let me get you some brandy." "No, no," murmured the barrister. "It is but a momentary faintness. I think I will go out into the fresh air. Are you quite sure that Mr. Childe bought the property from Lady Helen Montgomery's trustees?" "Quite sure. If you wait even a few moments I will show you the title deeds." No, thank you. I will call again. Pray excuse me." Somehow Bruce crossed the quiet square of the inn and plunged into the turmoil of the street. Amid the bustle of Holborn he had a curious sensation of safety. The fiend so suddenly installed in his consciousness was less busy here suggesting strange and maddening thoughts. Why? 50 questions beat incessantly against the barrier of agonized negation he strove to set up, but the noise of traffic made the attack confused. Each incautious bump against a passer-by, silent a demand. Each heavy crunch of a 'bus on the gravel-strewed roadway temporarily silenced a doubt. He was so unmanned that he felt almost on the verge of tears. He absolutely dared not attempt to reason out the fearful alternative which had so fiercely thrust itself upon him. At last he became vaguely aware that people were staring at him. Fearful lest some acquaintance should recognize and accost him, he hailed a hansom and drove to Victoria Street. All the way the heavy beat of the horse's feet served to distract his thoughts. He forced himself to count the quick paces, and tried hard to accommodate the numerals of 2 or more syllables to the rapidity of the animal's trot. He failed in this, but in the failure found relief. Nevertheless, though the horse was willing, and the driver eager to oblige a fare who gave a good address, the time seemed interminable until the cab stopped in front of his door. Once arrived there, he slowly ascended the stairs to his own flat, told Smith to pay the cabman half-a-crown and to admit no one, and threw himself into a chair. At last he was face to face with the troublous demon who possessed him in Lincoln's Inn, struggled with him through the crowd, and travelled with him in the hansom. Phyllis Browne should have her answer sooner than he had expected. The man who murdered Lady Dyke was her own husband. "Oh, heavens!" moaned Bruce, as he swayed restlessly to and fro in his chair. "Is it possible?" He sat there for hours. Smith entered, turned on the lights, and suggested tea, but received an impatient dismissal. After another long interval, Smith appeared again, to announce that Mr. White had called. "Did you not say I was out?" said Claude, his hollow tones and haggard air startling his faithful servitor considerably. "Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir. But that's no use with Mr. White. He said as how he was sure you were in." "Ask him to oblige me by coming again to morrow. I am very ill. I really cannot see him." Smith left the room only to return and say, "Mr. White says, sir, his business is of the utmost importance. He can't leave it, and he says you will be very sorry afterwards if you don't see him now." "Oh, so be it," cried Bruce, turning to a spirit stand to seek sustenance in a stiff glass of brandy. "Send him in." Quite awed by circumstances, Smith admitted the detective and closed the door upon the 2 men, who stood looking at each other without a word of greeting or explanation. Chapter 26 Chapter 27 of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Mr. White's Method. The policeman spoke first. "Has Jane Harding been here, then?" he said. His words conveyed no meaning to his hearer. They were so incongruous, so ridiculously unreasoning, that Bruce laughed hysterically. "You must have seen her," cried the detective excitedly. "I know you have learned the truth, and in no other way that I can imagine could it have reached you." "Learned what truth?" "That Sir Charles Dyke himself is at the bottom of all this business." "Indeed. How have you blundered upon that solution?" "Mr. Bruce, this time I am right, and you know it. It was Sir Charles Dyke who killed his wife. Nobody else had anything else to do with it, so far as I can guess. But if you haven't seen Jane Harding, I wonder how you found out." "You are speaking in riddles. Pray explain yourself." "If Sir Charles Dyke had not been out of town, the riddle would have been answered by this time in the easiest way, as I should have locked him up." "Excellent. You remain faithful to tradition." "Mr. Bruce, please don't try to humbug me for the sake of your friend. I am quite in earnest. I have come to you for advice. Sir Charles Dyke is guilty enough." "And what do you want me to do?" "To help me to adopt the proper course. The whole thing seems so astounding that I can hardly trust my own senses. I spoke hastily just now. I would not have touched Sir Charles before consulting you. I was never in such a mixed-up condition in my life." Whatever the source of his information, the detective had evidently arrived at the same conclusion as Bruce himself. There was nothing for it but to endeavor to reason out the situation calmly, and to follow the best method of dealing with it suggested by their joint intelligence. Claude motioned the detective to a chair, imposed silence by a look, and summoned Smith. He was faint from want of food. With returning equanimity, he resolved first to restore his strength, as he would need all his powers to wrestle with events before he slept that night. Mr. White, nothing loth, joined him in a simple meal, and by tacit consent, no reference was made to the one engrossing topic in their thoughts until the table was cleared. "And now, Mr. White," demanded the barrister, "what have you found out?" "During the last 2 days," he replied, "I have been unsuccessfully trying to trace Colonel Montgomery. No matter what I did, I failed. I got hold of several of Mrs. Hillmer's tradespeople, but she always paid her bills with her own checks, and none of them had ever heard of a Colonel Montgomery. That furniture business puzzled me a lot. The change of the drawing room set from one flat to another on November 7th, I mean. So I discovered the address of the people who supplied the new articles to Mrs. Hillmer." "How?" "Through the maid, Dobson. Mrs. Hillmer had given her notice to leave, and the girl is furious about it, as she appears to have had a very easy place there. I think it came to Mrs. Hillmer's ears that she talked to me." "I see. Proceed." "Here I hit upon a slight clue. It was a gentleman who ordered the new furniture, and directed the transfer of the articles replaced from number 61 to number 12 Raleigh Mansions. He did this early in the morning of November 7th, and the foreman in charge of the job remembered that there was some bother about it, as neither Mrs. Hillmer nor Mr. Corbett, as Mensmore used to be called, knew anything about it. But the gentleman came the same morning and explained matters. It struck the foreman as funny that there should be such a fearful hurry about refurnishing a drawing room, for the gentleman did not care what the cost was so long as the job was carried out at express speed. Another odd thing was that Mrs. Hillmer paid for the articles, though she had not ordered them, nor did she appear to want them. The man was quite sure that Mensmore's first knowledge of the affair came with the arrival of the first batch of articles from Mrs. Hillmer's flat, but he could only describe the mysterious agent as being a regular swell. He afterwards identified a portrait of Sir Charles Dyke as being exactly like the man he had seen, if not the man himself." "How did you come to have a portrait of Sir Charles in your possession?" "That appears later," said the detective, full of professional pride at the undoubtedly smart manner in which he had manipulated his facts once they were placed in order before him. "Of course," he went on, "I jumped at the conclusion that the stranger was this Colonel Montgomery. Then, while closely questioning the maid about the events of November 7th, she suddenly remembered that she lost an old skirt and coat about that time. They had vanished from her room, and she had never laid eyes on them since. This set me thinking. I confronted her with the clothes worn by Lady Dyke when she was found in the river, and I'm jiggered if Dobson didn't recognize them at once as being her missing property. Now wasn't that a rum go? "It certainly was," said Bruce, who was piecing together the story of the murder in his mind as each additional detail came to light. Naturally, I thought harder than ever after that. It then occurred to me that Jane Harding must have had some powerful reasons for so suddenly shutting up about the identification of her mistress's underclothing. She was right enough, as we know, in regard to the skirt and coat, but she admitted to me that the linen of the dead body was just the same as Lady Dyke's. Curiously enough, it was not marked by initials, crest, or laundry mark, and I ascertained months ago that owing to some fad of her ladyship's, all the family washing was done on the estate in Yorkshire. This explained the absence of the otherwise inevitable laundry mark. Thus far you are coherence itself. "Well," said Mr. White complacently, "I was a long time getting to work, Mr. Bruce, and had it not been for your help I should probably never have got at the truth. But I flatter myself that, once on the right track, I seldom leave it. However, as I was saying, I felt that Jane Harding knew a good deal more than she would tell, except under pressure, so I decided to put that pressure on." "In what way?" "I frightened her. Played off on her a bit of that stage business she is so fond of. This afternoon I placed a pair of handcuffs in my pocket and went to her place at Bloomsbury, having previously prepared a bogus warrant for her arrest on the charge of complicity in the murder of Lady Dyke." "It was a dangerous game." "Very. If it had gone wrong and reached the ears of the Commissioner or got into the papers, I should have been reduced or dismissed. But what is a policeman to do in such cases? I was losing my temper over this infernal inquiry and never obtaining any real light, though always coming across startling developments. It had to end somehow, and I took the chance. The make believe warrant and the production of handcuffs for a woman they are never used, you know, in reality have often been trump cards for us when everything else failed. This time, then, the properties made up the show, as Miss Harding would put it?" "They did, and no mistake. I gave her no time to think or act. I found her sitting with her mother, admiring a new carpet she had just laid down. I said, 'Is your name Jane Harding, now engaged at the Jollity Theatre, under the alias of Marie le Marchant, but formerly a maid in the service of Lady Dyke?' She grew very white and said 'Yes,' while her mother clutched hold of her, terrified. Then I whipped out the warrant and the cuffs. My, but you should have heard them squeal when the bracelets clinked together. 'What has my child done?' screamed the mother. 'Perhaps nothing, madam,' I answered, 'but she is guilty in the eyes of the law just the same if she persists in screening the guilty parties.' Jane Harding was trembling and blubbering, but she said, 'It is very hard on me. I have done nothing.' I trembled myself then, as I feared that she might offer to come with me to the police station, in which case I should have been dished. But the mother fixed the affair splendidly. 'I am sure my daughter will not conceal anything,' she said, 'and it is a shame to disgrace her in this way without telling what it is that you want to know.' I took the cue in an instant. 'I am empowered,' I said, 'to suspend this warrant, and perhaps do away with it altogether if she answers my questions fully and truthfully.' 'Why, of course she will,' said the mother, and the girl, though desperately upset, whimpered her agreement. With that I got the whole story." "Sir Charles Dyke inspired her actions, I suppose?" "From the very beginning, almost. At first Jane Harding herself believed, when she gave evidence at the inquest, that the body she saw was not that of Lady Dyke, but afterwards she changed her opinion, especially when she recalled the exact pattern and materials of the underclothing. Then my inquiries put her on the scent. Being rather a sharp girl, she jumped to the conclusion that Sir Charles knew more about the matter than he professed. In any case, her place was gone, and she would soon be dismissed, so she resolved on a plan even bolder than mine in threatening to lock her up. She watched her opportunity, found Sir Charles alone one day, and told him that from certain things within her knowledge She thought it her duty to go to the police station. He was startled, she could see, and asked her to explain herself. She said that her mistress had been killed and she might be able to put the police on the right track. He hesitated, not knowing what to say, so she hinted that it would mean a lot of trouble to her, and she would prefer, if she had £500, to go to America and let the matter drop altogether. He told her that he did not desire to have Lady Dyke's name brought into public notoriety. Sooner than to allow such a thing to occur, he would give her the money. An hour later he handed her 50 £10 notes. "What a wretched mistake!" cried Bruce involuntarily. This unmasking of his unfortunate friend's duplicity was the most painful feature of all to him. "Perhaps it was," replied the detective, "but the thing is not yet quite clear to me. That is why I am here. But to continue, the girl admitted that she lost her head a bit. Instead of leaving the house openly, without attracting comment, she simply bolted, thus giving rise to the second sensational element attending Lady Dyke's disappearance. But she resolved to be faithful to her promise. When you found her she held her tongue, and even wrote to Sir Charles to assure him that she had not spoken a word to a soul. He sent for her, and pitched into her about not going to America, but took her address in case he wished to see her again. He recognized her letter writing powers, no doubt." "Evidently. She was surprised last Thursday to receive a telegram asking her to meet him at York Station. When she arrived there, he asked her to write the letter he handed to you and post it to London on Saturday evening. He explained that this action was due to his keen anxiety to shield his wife's name, and that this letter would settle the affair altogether. As he handed her another bundle of notes, and promised to settle £100 a year on her for life, she was willing enough to help him. During your interview with her, you guessed the reason why she wrote Lady Dyke's hand so perfectly. She had copied it for 3 years." "All this must have astonished you considerably." "Mr. Bruce, astonished isn't the word. I was flabbergasted. Once she started talking I let her alone, only rattling the handcuffs when she seemed inclined to stop. But all the time I felt as if the top of my head had been blown off." "I imagine she had not much more to tell you." "She pitched into you as the cause of all the mischief, and went so far as to say that she was sure it was not Sir Charles who killed Lady Dyke, but you yourself." Bruce winced at Jane Harding's logic. Were he able to retrieve the past 3 months, the mystery of Lady Dyke's death would have remained a mystery forever. "Now about the photograph," said the detective. "After I had left Jane Harding with a solemn warning to speak to no one until I saw her again, I made a round of the fashionable photographers and soon obtained an excellent likeness of Sir Charles. I showed it to Dobson, and she said, 'That is Colonel Montgomery.' I showed it to the foreman of the furniture warehouse, and he said, 'That is the image of the man who ordered Mrs. Hillmer's suit.' Now what on earth is the upshot of this business to be? I called at Wensley House, but was told Sir Charles was not in town. Had he been in, I would not have seen him until I had discussed matters with you." "That is very good of you, Mr. White. May I ask your reason for showing him this consideration?" The policeman, who was very earnest and very excited, banged his hand on the table as he cried, "Don't you see what all this amounts to? I have no option but to arrest Sir Charles Dyke for the murder of his wife." "That is a sad conclusion." "And do you believe he killed her?" "Strange as it may seem to you, I do not." "And I'm jiggered if I do either." I am greatly obliged to you, Mr. White." Claude bent his head almost to his knees, and for some minutes there was complete silence. When he again looked at the detective there were tears in his eyes. "What can we do to unravel this tangled skein without creating untold mischief?" he murmured. "It beats me, sir," was the perplexed answer. "But when I came in I imagined that Jane Harding or some one had been to see you. Surely you had learned something of all this before my arrival?" "Yes, indeed. I had reached your goal, but by a different route. Unfortunately, my discovery only goes to confirm yours." Bruce then told him of his visit to the lawyer's office, and its result. Mr. White listened to the recital with knitted brows. "It is very clear," he said, when the barrister had ended, "that Lady Dyke was killed in Mrs. Hillmer's flat, that Sir Charles knew of her death, that he himself conveyed the body to the river bank at Putney, and that ever since he has tried to throw dust in our eyes and prevent any knowledge of the true state of affairs reaching us. Your summary cannot be disputed in the least particular. Well, Mr. Bruce, we must do something. If you don't like to interfere, then I must. There is but one person in the world who can enlighten us as to the facts. That person, obviously, is Sir Charles Dyke himself." "Unquestionably." Bruce looked at his watch. It was 10:30 p.m. He rose. "Let us go to him," he said. "But he is not in London." "He is. I expect you will find that he gave orders for no one to be admitted, and told the servants to say he had left town to make the denial more emphatic. It will be a terrible business, I fear, Mr. Bruce." "I dread it. On my soul, I do. But I cannot shirk this final attempt to save my friend. My presence may tend to help forward a final and full explanation. No matter what the pain to myself, I must be present. Come, it is late already." Chapter 27. Chapter 28 of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Sir Charles Dyke's Journey. The streets were comparatively deserted as they drove quickly up Whitehall and crossed the south side of Trafalgar Square. It is a common belief, even among Londoners themselves, that the traffic is dense in the main thoroughfares at all hours of the night until 12 o'clock has long passed. But to the experienced eye there is a marked hiatus between half-past 9 and 11 o'clock. At such a time Charing Cross is negotiable, Piccadilly Circus loses much of its terror, and a hansom may turn out of Regent Street into Oxford Street without the fare being impelled to clutch convulsively at the brass window slide in a make-believe effort to save the vehicle from being crushed like a walnut shell between two heavy buses. Such considerations did not appeal to the barrister and his companion on this occasion. For some inexplicable cause they both felt that they were in a desperate hurry. A momentary stoppage at the turn into Orchard Street caused each man to swear, quite unconsciously. Now that the supreme moment in this most painful investigation was at hand, they resented the slightest delay. Though they were barely 15 minutes in the cab, it seemed an hour before they alighted at Wensley House, Portman Square. In response to an imperative ring, a footman appeared. Instead of answering the barrister's question as to whether Sir Charles was at home or not, he said, "You are Mr. Bruce, sir, aren't you?" "Yes." "Sir Charles is at home, but he retired to his room before dinner. He is not well, and he may have gone to bed, but he said if you came you were to be admitted. I will ask Mr. Thompson." "Better send Thompson to me," said Bruce decisively, and in a minute the old butler stood before him. "I hear that Sir Charles has retired for the night," said Claude. Thompson had caught sight of the detective standing on the steps. A few hours earlier he had himself told that the baronet was out of town. It was an awkward dilemma, and he coughed doubtingly while he racked his brains for a judicious answer. But Bruce grasped his difficulty. "It is all right, Thompson. Mr. White quite understands the position. Do you think Sir Charles is in bed?" "I will go and see, sir. He was very anxious that you should be sent upstairs if you called. But that was when he was in the library." Bruce and the detective entered the hall, the butler closed the door behind them, and then solemnly ascended the stairs to Sir Charles Dyke's bedroom, which was situated on the first floor along a corridor towards the back of the house. They distinctly heard the polite knock at the door and Thompson's query, "Are you asleep, Sir Charles?" After a pause there was another knock, and the same question in a slightly louder key. Then the butler returned, saying as he came down the stairs, "Sir Charles seems to be sound asleep, sir." Bruce and the detective exchanged glances. The barrister was disappointed, almost perturbed, but he said, "In that case we will not disturb him. Sir Charles does not often retire so early." "No, sir. I have never known him to go to his room so early before. He told me not to serve dinner, as he wasn't well. He would not let me get anything for him. He just took some wine, and I have not seen him since." "Since when?" "About 7:30, sir." Bruce turned to depart, but Thompson, with the privilege of an old servant when talking to one whom he knew to be on familiar terms with his master, whispered, "That there blessed maid turned up again this afternoon, sir." The barrister started violently. "Not Jane Harding, surely?" "Yes, sir. She came at 4 o'clock and asked for Sir Charles, as bold as brass." "Did he see her?" "Oh, yes, sir." "Did you hear that, White?" The detective nodded. "She must have reached the house about half an hour before me," he said, addressing the butler. "That's about right, sir." "But I understood," went on Bruce, "that Sir Charles was not at home to ordinary callers." Thompson shuffled about somewhat uneasily. He wished now he had held his tongue. "I had my orders, sir," he murmured, in extenuation of his apparently diverse actions. "Tell me what your orders were," persisted Bruce. The man hesitated, not wishful to offend his master's friend, but too well trained to reveal the explicit instructions given him by Sir Charles Dyke. "Do not be afraid. I will explain everything to Sir Charles personally. We cannot best judge what to do, whether to wake him or not, unless we know the position," went on the barrister. Thus absolved from blame, Thompson took from his waistcoat pocket a folded sheet of notepaper. "I don't pretend to understand the reason, sir, but Sir Charles wrote this himself and told me to be careful to obey him exactly." The barrister eagerly grasped the note and read: "If Mr. Bruce, Jane Harding, or Mrs. Hillmer should call, admit any of them immediately. To all others say that I have left town some days ago should they ask you. C.D." White, round-eyed and bullet-headed, gazed with goggle orbs over Bruce's shoulder. "That settles it, Mr. Bruce," he said. "We must see him." "Thompson," said Bruce, "does Sir Charles usually lock his door?" "Never, sir." "Very well, knock again, and then try the door. We will go with you." Something in the barrister's manner rather than his words sent a cold shiver down the old butler's spine. "I do hope there is nothing wrong, sir," he commenced, but Bruce was already halfway up the stairs. Both he and White guessed what had happened. They knew that poor Thompson's repeated summons at the bedroom door would remain forever unanswered, that the unfortunate baronet had quitted the dread certainties of this world for the uncertainties of the next. They were not mistaken. A few minutes later they found him listlessly drooping over the side of the chair in which he was seated, partly undressed, and seemingly overcome at the moment when he was about to take off his boots. On a table near him were two bottles, both half emptied, and an empty wineglass. Each of the bottles bore the label of a well-known chemist. One was endorsed "sleeping draught," the other "poison" and "chloral." The three men were as pale as the limp, inanimate form in the chair while they silently noted these details. Bruce raised the head of his friend in the hope that life might not yet be extinct. But Sir Charles Dyke had taken his measures effectually. Though the rigor mortis had not yet set in, he had evidently been dead some time. Thompson, quite beside himself with grief, dropped to his knees by his master's side. "Sir Charles!" he wailed. "Sir Charles, for the love of heaven, speak to us! You can't be dead. Oh, you can't! It ain't fair! You're too young to die! What curse has come upon the house that both should go?" Bruce leaned over and shook the old butler firmly by the shoulder. "Thompson," he said impressively, for now that the crisis he feared had come and gone, he exercised full control over himself. "Thompson, if you ever wished to serve Sir Charles you must do so now by remaining calm. For his sake help us, and do not create an unnecessary scene." Governed by the more powerful nature, the affrighted man struggled to his feet. "What shall I do?" he whimpered. "Shall I send for a doctor?" "Yes, say Sir Charles is very ill. Not a word to a soul about what has happened until we have carefully examined the room." At that instant Mr. White caught sight of a large and bulky envelope which had fallen to the floor near the chair on which Sir Charles was seated. Picking it up, he found it was addressed "Claude Bruce, Esquire, to be delivered to him at once." "This will explain matters, I expect," said the detective. "Whatever could have come to my master to do such a thing?" groaned Thompson, turning to reach the door. "Come back!" cried Bruce sharply. "Now look here, Thompson," he went on, placing both his hands on the butler's shoulders and looking him straight in the eyes. "It is imperative that you should pull yourself together. That sort of remark will never do. Sir Charles has simply taken an overdose of chloral accidentally. He has slept badly ever since Lady Dyke's death, you understand, and has been in the habit of taking sleeping draughts. Now before you leave the room tell me exactly what has happened in your own language." "I can't put it together now, sir, but I won't say anything to anybody. You can trust me for that. Why, I loved him as my own son, I did." "Yes, I know that well. But remember, an overdose, an accident, nothing else. Do you follow me?" "Quite, sir. Heaven help us all." "Very well. Now send for the doctor without needlessly alarming the other servants." Bruce placed the envelope in the pocket of his overcoat, saying to the detective, "We will examine this later, White. Just now we must do what we can to avoid a scandal. The case between Lady Dyke and her husband will be settled by a higher tribunal than we had counted upon." "It certainly looks like an accident, Mr. Bruce," was the answer, "but it all depends upon the view the doctor takes. And you know, of course, that I shall have to report the actual facts to my superiors." "That is obvious. Yet no harm is done at this early stage in taking such steps as may finally render undue publicity needless. It may be impossible, but on the other hand, until we have heard Sir Charles's version, contained, I suppose, in this letter to me, it is advisable to sustain the theory of an accidental death." "Anything I can do to help you will be done," replied the detective. With that they dropped the subject and more carefully scrutinized the room. To all intents and purposes, Sir Charles Dyke might, indeed, have brought about the catastrophe inadvertently. The sleeping draught bore the ledger number of its prescription, and there is nothing unusual in the patient striving to help the cautious dose ordered by a physician by the addition of a more powerful nostrum. His partly dressed state, too, argued that he had taken the fatal mixture at a time when he contemplated retiring to rest forthwith. A fire still burned in the grate. On the mantelpiece, in a position where the baronet must see it until the moment when all things faded from his vision, was a beautiful miniature of his wife. The detective, with professional nonchalance, soon sat down. There was nothing to do but to await the arrival of the doctor, and having heard his report, go home. In the quietude of the room, with the strain relaxed, Bruce was profoundly moved by the spectacle of his dead friend. Whatever his logical faculties might argue, he could not regard this man as a murderer. If Lady Dyke met her death at his hand, then it must have been the result of some terrible mistake, or some momentary outburst of passion which never contemplated such a sequel. Poisons which kill by stupefaction do not distort their victims as in cases where violent irritants are used. Sir Charles Dyke seemed to live in a deep sleep, exhausted by toil or pain, sleep the counterfeit of death, while the bright colours and speaking eyes of the miniature counterfeited life. Standing between these two, both the mere images of the man and the woman he had known so well, the barrister insensibly felt that at last they had peace. It was his first experience of the tremendous change in the relationship established by death. It utterly overpowered him. No mere words could express his emotions. Between him and those that had been was imposed the impenetrable wall of eternity. A bustle in the hall beneath aroused him from his grief-stricken stupor, and Mr. White's commonplace tones sounded strange to his ears. "Here's the doctor." A well-known physician hastened to the room. Thompson had carefully followed instructions. The doctor was not prepared for the condition of affairs that a glance revealed to his practised eye. "Surely he is not dead?" he cried. looking from the form in the chair to the two men. Bruce answered him. Yes, for some hours, I fear, but we wanted to avoid spreading unnecessary rumors until— I understand. My poor friend, how came this to happen? The skilled practitioner merely lifted one of the dead man's eyelids and then turned to examine the bottles on the table. My own prescription, he said, after tasting the contents of one phial. Ah, this was bad. Why did he not consult me? And he sadly shook his head as he tasted the remaining liquid in the second. What do you make of it? Said Bruce. He looked the other steadily in the face, and the doctor interpreted the cause of his anxiety. A clear case of accidental poisoning, he replied. Sir Charles has consulted me several times during the past week on account of his extreme insomnia. I specifically warned him against overdoing my treatment. Change of air, exercise, and diet are the true specifics for sleeplessness, especially when induced, as his was, by a morbid state of mind. You mean that Sir Charles has never recovered from the shock of his wife's death? I did not know of it myself until it was announced recently, and I gathered from him that the manner of her demise was partly unaccounted for. Altogether, it is a sad business that such a couple should be taken in such a manner. Mr. White was industriously taking notes the while, and the doctor regarded him with a questioning look. "This gentleman is in the police," explained Bruce. "Indeed?" "Yes, we came here by mere accident. Mr. White and I were engaged in an important inquiry, the cause of Lady Dyke's disappearance, in fact, and we hurried here at a late hour to consult with Sir Charles. Hence our presence and this discovery." "How strange!" "There is no reason now," broke in the detective, "why the body should not be moved?" Claude shuddered at the phrase. It suggested the inevitable. "Not in the least. I am quite satisfied as to the cause of death." The dispatch of telegrams and other necessary details kept Bruce busily employed until 2 o'clock. Not until he reached the privacy of his own library was he able to break the seal of the packet left for him as the final act and word of the late Sir Charles Dyke. Chapter 28. Chapter 29 of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. How Lady Dyke Disappeared. Being the manuscript left by Sir Charles Dyke, Baronet, and addressed to Claude Bruce, Esquire, Barrister at Law. It is customary, I believe, for poor wretches who are sentenced to undergo the last punishment of the law to be allowed a 3 weeks' respite between the date of their sentence and that on which they are executed. I am in the position of such a one. The difference between me and the convicted felon lies merely in the environment. In most respects I am worse situated than he. My period of agony is longer drawn out. I am condemned to die by my own hand. I am mocked by the surroundings of luxury, taunted by the knowledge that though life and even a sort of happiness are within my reach, I must not avail myself to them. There may come a time in the affairs of any man when he is compelled to choose between a dishonored existence and voluntary death. These unpleasant alternatives are now before me. You, who know me, would never doubt which of them I should adopt, nor will you upbraid me because our judgments coincide. There is nothing for it, Bruce, but quiet death. Death in the least obtrusive form, and so disposed that it may be possible for you, chief among my friends and the only person that I can trust to fulfill my wishes, to arrange that my memory may be speedily forgotten. My virtues, I fear, will not secure me immortality. My faults, I hope, will not be spread broadcast to cram the maws of the gaping crowd. I do not shirk this final issue, nor do I crave pity. In setting forth plainly the history of my wife's death and its results, I am actuated solely by a desire to protect others from needless suspicion. Having resolved to pay forfeit for my own errors, I claim to have expiated them. This document is an explanation, not a confession. I have not much time left wherein fittingly to shape my story so as to be just to all, myself included. I am not mistaken, the officers of the law are in hot chase of me, but my statement shall not be made to an earthly judge. The words of a man about to die may not be well chosen, they should at least be true. I will tell you of events as nearly as possible in the sequence of time. If I leave gaps through haste or forgetfulness, you will, from your own knowledge of the facts, readily fill them up once you are in possession of the salient features. Mensmore and his sister were the friends of my early years. We played together as children. Gwendoline Mensmore was 2 years younger than I, and I well remember making love to her at the age of 11. Her mother died when she was quite a baby, and her father married again, so her step-brother Albert is her junior by 4 years. I taught him how to ride and swim and play cricket. My father's place in Surrey, we did not acquire the Yorkshire property until the death of my grandfather, adjoined the estate General Mensmore occupied after his retirement from the army. We children always called Gwendoline Dick to avoid the difficulty of her long-sounding name, I suppose, and I honestly believe that our respective parents entertained the idea that a marriage between us was quite a natural thing. I went to school at Brighton, and Mensmore, being a somewhat precocious lad, joined the same school before I left. The headmaster, the Reverend Septimus Child, was an old friend of my father's, and when he wished to purchase a house at Putney, the terrible house which has figured in my dreams for the past 3 months as a place of skulls, my parents put pressure on my mother's trustees to make the transaction an easy one. Of course I knew it well. We regarded it in those early days as a town house, and always lived there during the season. My father's succession to the title and estates changed all that. We quitted Surrey for Yorkshire, and Wensley House, Portman Square, was a step upwards from the barrack-like building which so admirably suited Mr. Child's requirements. When I was at Sandhurst, General Mensmore got into difficulties. He quitted Surrey, and we gradually lost sight of him and his children. Afterwards I knew that he struggled on for a few years, placed his son in the army, and then came a complete collapse, ending in his death and the boy's resignation of his commission. Of Gwendoline Mensmore's whereabouts I knew nothing. Her memory never quitted me, but the new interests in life dulled it. I imagined that I could laugh at a childish infatuation. Then I married. I did so in obedience to my father's wishes, and Alice was, I suppose, an ideal wife, far too ideal for a youngster of my lower intellectual plane. I know now that I never had any real affection for her. I was always somewhat awed by her loftier aspirations. My interests lay in racing, hunting, sports generally, and having what I defined as a good time. She, though an excellent horsewoman, and in every sense an admirable hostess, thought Newmarket vulgar, treated Ascot as a social necessity, and turned up her eyebrows at me when I failed to see any utility in schemes for the reclamation of the submerged tenth. Thus, though we never quarrelled, we gradually drifted apart. She knew she bored me if she asked me to inspect a model dwelling. I knew she hated the people who were the companions of a coaching tour or a week at Goodwood. Unfortunately, we were not blessed with offspring. Had it been otherwise, we might have found a common object of interest in our children. Insensibly, we agreed to a separate existence. We lived together as friends rather than as husband and wife. We parted without regret and met without cordiality. Do not think we were unhappy. If our marriage was not bliss, it was at least comfortable. I think my wife was proud of my success on the turf in a quiet kind of way, and I certainly was proud of her and the high reputation she enjoyed among all classes of society. I even reverenced her for it, and I well knew that the enthusiastic receptions given us by our Yorkshire tenantry were not due to my efforts on their behalf, but to hers. So we lived for nearly 6 years, and so we might have continued for 60 had I not met Gwendoline Mensmore again, under vastly changed circumstances. She was a chorus girl in a variety theatre, earning a poor living under wretched conditions. I discovered the fact by mere chance. I met her, and she told me her story, how she had married a man named Hillmer, whom her father had trusted, and whom she believed to be able to save them from ruin. Then the crash came. Her father died, her husband also broke down financially, took to drink and ill-treated her. Her brother was swallowed up somewhere in the far West. She had no alternative but to live apart from her husband, and try to support herself by the first career that suggests itself to young, talented, and beautiful woman. But she was already weary of the stage and its distasteful surroundings. Her nature was too delicate for the rude friendships of the dressing-room. She shuddered at the thought of a mild carousal in a bar when the labors of the night were ended. In a word, were I differently constituted, were she cast in more common mould, there was apparently ready to hand all the material for a vulgar liaison. My respect for my wife, however, no less than Mrs. Hillmer's fine disposition, saved both of us from folly. Yet I could not leave her exposed to the exigencies of a life in which she was rapidly becoming disillusioned. Away in the depths of my heart I knew that this sweet woman was my true mate, separated from me by adverse chance. There was nothing unfair to Alice in the thought. Were she questioned at any time, I suppose she must have admitted that we were, in some respects, as ill-matched a couple as we were well-matched in others. You will say that I understood but little of feminine nature, nothing at all of my wife's. How best to help Mrs. Hillmer, that was the question. It was at this stage that I made the initial mistake to which I can, too late, trace a host of succeeding misfortunes. I did not consult my wife. Trying now to analyze my reasons for this lamentable error of judgment, I imagined that it arose from some absurd disinclination on my part to admit that I went to the stage door of a theatre to inquire about the identity of a young woman whom I had recognized from the front of the house. Don't you see, my dear Bruce, it is almost as bad to fear your wife as to suspect her. As at that time my own life was free from the slightest cloud of sorrow, I took keen interest in the troubles of Mrs. Hillmer, and I amused myself by playing, in her behalf, the part of a modern magician. I felt intuitively that she would resent any direct attempt on my part to place funds at her disposal, and I found a great deal of harmless fun in helping her with her consent but without her actual knowledge. I am, as you know, a rich man. At this hour I cannot sum my available assets to within £10,000. Altogether I must be worth nearly £1,000,000, yet my money cannot purchase me another day's existence such as I would tolerate. Strange, is it not? Well, the close of the year before last was a period of unexampled activity on the Stock Exchange, and by way of joke I made some purchases on Mrs. Hillmer's account, with the intention of pretending to pay myself out of the profits, while handing her such balances as might accrue. She is a shrewd woman, and quick at figures, so I might have experienced some difficulty in deceiving her. But the mad record of the past 12 months was in no wise belied by its inception. My purchases were those of a man inspired by the goddess of fortune. Stocks which I bought commenced suddenly to inflate. I astounded my brokers by the manner in which I ferreted out neglected bonds, mines which struck the mother lode next week, railway companies whose directors were even then secretly conspiring to water the stock. Mrs. Hillmer became infected with a craze like myself. Twice we plunged heavily in American rails and came out triumphantly. To end this part of my story, after 5 months of excitement I had contrived not only to swell my own deposits to a large extent, but I had secured on Mrs. Hillmer's account a sufficient quantity of reliable stock to bring her in an average income of £1,500 per annum. My greatest difficulty was to persuade Mrs. Hillmer to break off the habit of speculation once she had contracted it. I found that she perused the late editions of the evening papers with the same eagerness that a bookmaker looks for the starting prices of the day's races. By the exercise of firmness and tact, I was able to stop her from further dealings. At the close of this period I need hardly say that two things had happened. Mrs. Hillmer and I were fast friends, with common objects and interests in life, and concurrently the ties between Alice and myself had loosened still more. I also carelessly made another blunder. Under the pretence that secrecy was requisite for Stock Exchange transactions, I persuaded Mrs. Hillmer to allow me to pass under the name of Colonel Montgomery. Mrs. Hillmer, of course, was now able to live in comparative luxury. I came to regard her house as an abode of rest. I was more at home in her drawing room than in my own house. She often spoke to me of my wife, and obviously wished to see her, but here I did a cowardly thing. I represented my married existence as far less comfortable than it really was, and gradually Mrs. Hillmer ceased all allusion to Alice. She misunderstood our relations. I knew it and did not explain. Not a very worthy proceeding for a man whose sense of honor is so keen that he prefers death to disgrace. But one can deceive no other so easily as oneself. Occasionally, when opportunities offered, we went out together. It was foolish, you will say, and I agree with you. If folly were not pleasant, it would not be so fashionable. But to this hour, the relations between us are those only of close friendship. Never in my life have I addressed her by other than her married name. Never have I touched her arm save by way of casual politeness. I really think I flattered myself upon my superior virtues. I could see all the excellence but none of the stupidity of my behavior. About this time Mrs. Hillmer's husband died. Thenceforth she became slightly reserved in manner. When life was a defiance, she fought convention, but with safety came prudence. In fact, she told me that my frequent visits to her house would certainly be ill construed if they became known. I was seeking for a pretext to introduce her to my own set in society when a double catastrophe occurred. My wife discovered, as she imagined, that I was clandestinely occupied with another woman, and Mrs. Hillmer's brother returned from America. It will best serve my hurried narrative if I relate events exactly as they happened and not as they look in the light of subsequent knowledge. Mensmore was naturally astounded to find his sister so well provided for, and gratefully accepted the help she gave him towards resuscitating his own fortunes. But it did not occur to either of us that he would take the ordinary view of the bond existing between us, and I shall never forget his rage when he found out that I was not known to his sister's servants by my right name. It was an awkward position for all three. He was loth to allege that which we did not feel called upon to deny, but between him and me there was a marked coolness arising from suspicion on his part and resentment on mine, coupled, I must add, with an unquiet consciousness that his attitude was not wholly unreasonable. Mrs. Hillmer and he discussed the matter several times. He urged that this compromising friendship should be discontinued. She, a determined woman when her mind was made up, fought the suggestion on the ground of unfairness, though, like myself, she would have been glad of any accident which would alter the position of affairs. He interpreted her opposition to different motives. Finally, as his financial position was a dangerous one, as we afterwards learned, and he despaired of setting things straight in Raleigh Mansions, judging them from his own point of view, he resolved to leave England again. And now I come to the night of November 6th. It was, as you will remember, a foggy and unpleasant day. I had some business in the city which detained me until darkness set in. I had not seen Mrs. Hillmer for 2 days, so I resolved to drive to Sloane Square. Travelling by the Underground was intolerable in such weather, and have tea with her. I did not know then that she had gone with her maid to Brighton, intending to return that evening. It was a sudden whim, she told me subsequently, and she had not even informed the other servants of her intention. The pavements in the city were slimy with the dampness of the fog, and as an empty four-wheeler passed through Cornhill I hailed it, a most unusual choice on my part. The cabman, I noticed, was fairly elevated, but as these fellows often drive better when drunk than sober, I simply told him to be careful and jumped in. I reached Sloane Square all right, and detained the cab for my intended journey home in time for dinner. At the door of Mrs. Hillmer's flat I met the cook and housemaid, both going out to do some shopping probably, in the spare hour before it was time to prepare dinner. They knew me well, of course, and admitted me to the drawing room, telling me that Mrs. Hillmer was out, but would surely return very soon. I had not been in the same room a minute before the sharp double knock of a telegraph messenger brought the coachman, whom the girls left in charge of the house, to the door, and I startled the man by appearing in the hall as he did not know of my presence. "What is it, Simmons?" I said, as I correctly guessed the message to be for Mrs. Hillmer. "The missus is in Brighton, sir," he answered. "She wants the carriage to meet her at Victoria at 7 o'clock. It's 6 now, and I ought to go around to the stables at once, but both these blessed girls have gone out. I'm in a fair fix." "No fix at all," I said. "I want to see Mrs. Hillmer, so I will wait here until she arrives, or, at all events, till the servants come back." The man scratched his head, but he could think of no better plan, so he too went off, and I was left alone, for the first time in my life, in Mrs. Hillmer's abode. It is the small events that govern our lives, Claude, not those that stand out prominently. The shopping expedition of a couple of servant girls, intent on securing a new cap or a few yards of calico, brought about my wife's death, caused misery to many people, and ends, I sincerely hope, in my own speedy leap into oblivion. I picked up a novel, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, hit upon the terrible episode that culminates on Salisbury Plain, and was soon deeply interested when another knock, this time an imperative summons long drawn out, caused me to hasten to the door. I opened it, and in the dim light of the staircase landing, for a second did not recognize the lady who stood outside. Heaven help me, I was soon enlightened. My wife's voice was bitterly contemptuous as she said, "You don't keep a footman, it appears, in your new establishment, Charles." Had I been suddenly struck blind or paralyzed, I could not have been more dumbfounded than by Alice's unexpected appearance. A thorough scoundrel might, perhaps, have thought of the best thing to say. I blurted out the worst. "What are you doing here?" I stammered when my tongue recovered its use. "No doubt you resent my appearance," she cried, in a high, shrill tone I had never before heard from her. "But I shall not trouble you further. I merely came to confirm with my own eyes what my ears refused to entertain. Now I am satisfied." She half turned with the intention of reaching the street, but, rendered desperate by the absurdity of my position, I gripped her arm and pulled her forcibly into the entrance hall, closing and bolting the door behind us. "You have seen too much not to see more," I cried. "I will not allow you to ruin both our lives by a mere suspicion." She was in a furious temper, but her sense of propriety, for she did not know that the servants' quarters were empty, restrained her until we had both entered the drawing room. Then she burst upon me with a torrent of words. Chapter 29. Chapter 30 of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Sir Charles Dyke ends his narrative. "A mere suspicion, indeed," she said, and there was that in her voice which warned me that I had better try unarmed to control a tigress than a wife who deemed herself wronged. "These are pretty suspicions that surround you. A house tenanted by another woman where you are evidently master. A mistress who left the ranks of the ballet, or something of the sort, living in luxury on means supplied by you. A married woman who casts off her husband with her poverty to take up a paramour and riches. Do you think you can blind my eyes further? I have the most convincing proofs of your infamy. Do not imagine that on any specious pretext you will condone your conduct. I despise you from the depths of my heart. Thenceforth I will strive to forget your very existence." "Alice," I said, and if she had not been blinded by passion she must have been affected by my earnestness, "will you listen to me?" "Why should I? What respect have you shown to me that I should now seem even to accept your excuses?" "I appeal to you not to do anything in anger. You have good reason to be enraged with me. I only ask you to suspend your final judgment. Hear what I have to say, take time for deliberation, for further inquiry, and then condemn me to any punishment you think fit." She did not answer me. Her eyes were roving round the room and taking stock of every indication of poor Mrs. Hillmer's artistic aptitude. The place was eminently homelike, much more so than our elegant mansion in Portman Square, and my wife noted the fact with momentarily increasing bitterness. Yet I essayed my desperate task with failing nerve and terrible consciousness of a bad cause. "Notwithstanding all that you have seen and heard," I said, "I am not guilty of the crime you accuse me of. Mrs. Hillmer is an old friend of mine, whom I have helped from a state of misery to one of comfort and comparative happiness. She is as pure-minded in thought, as spotless in character as you are yourself. You are doing her a grievous injustice by doubting the relations between her and me. If you only knew her—" My wife laughed scornfully. "Pray spare yourself, Charles. I have never seen you so interested before, but you lie badly nevertheless." "I do not lie. Before heaven I am telling you the truth." "You are even willing to perjure yourself, Colonel Montgomery?" My poor armor was ill-fitted for this stroke. I suppose I must have flinched before it, for she went on. "You see I am well posted. My detectives have done their work well. Oh, heaven, that I should ever have learned to love a vile wretch like you. I thought you respected me at least. I tried hard to bend my own wishes to sympathy with yours, and I dreamt even of ultimate success. I knew you didn't care much for me, but the devotion of a slave has at times been rewarded by the affection of her master. Fortunately, I am a slave by choice. It only required experience to break my bonds, and you have supplied the experience." For the first time in my life did it dawn on me that my self-contained and haughty wife harbored other thoughts than a sentiment of respect for an indulgent and easily controlled husband. It was a shock to me, a deeper humiliation than she dreamt of. How could I expiate the past, wipe out this record of error and folly, but not of ill-doing, and live happily with her so long as Providence was pleased to spare us? While these things ran through my brain she suddenly turned on me. "You fear exposure in the law courts. You dread your name figuring in a society scandal. How little you know me! You naturally compare me by your own contemptible standard. I left your house to-night, determined never to return to it should I find you here, as in all probability I was told would be the case. I will go to my sister until I have determined upon my future life. You at least will never, by my desire, see or hear from me again. Thus far, I presume, I will fall in with your views." She would have passed me, but I held fast to the inside of the door. If once she got away from me, I might never be able to set affairs even tolerably right. Better, I deemed, have one trying scene in the hope that she would calm down in the face of facts, than allow her to carry the quarrel to her relatives and strengthen her attitude by her natural support. "Alice," I said, "you shall not go." "How can you dare to detain me?" she shrieked, and the glint in her eyes showed how thoroughly her passions were aroused. "You can separate from me if you will. I shall not venture to hinder you. But I swear you shall not do this rash act without knowledge. I tell you, you must remain here. When you leave this house, you do so in my company." "And why am I to be kept a prisoner?" "Mrs. Hillmer will return in less than an hour. You have sought this meeting yourself. Very well, you shall have it." When your charges have been thoroughly thrashed out in the presence of Mrs. Hillmer and myself, I will then accompany you where you will, and leave you under the protection of your sister, or any one else you choose should you still persist in leaving me." Of course my action was unwise to the last degree. But remember, Claude, that during these last awful 5 minutes I had seen a side of my wife's nature hidden from me 6 long years. And I was a man suddenly plunged into a raging sea, drifting helplessly I knew not whither. All that consumed me was a wild desire for such scant justice as I deserved. I had erred, but my faults were not those my wife alleged against me. If she was angry before, she was now absolutely uncontrollable. "What!" she screamed, "remain to meet your mistress? Never while I have life." She flung herself upon me so suddenly that she tore me away from the door. She was a strong and athletic woman, and I suppose she expected some resistance, for she used such force as to drag me forward into the middle of the room, overturning a chair in the effort. I was so utterly taken by surprise that I yielded to her violence more completely than she expected. She staggered, let go of her hold, and fell heavily backwards, tripping over the fallen chair. I made a desperate attempt to save her, but only caught the end of a fur necklet, and it tore like a spider's web. Her body crashed against the Venetian fender, and her head came with awful force against a sort of support for the fire irons that stood up a foot from the ground. Then she rolled over, her eyes and face undergoing a ghastly change, and instantly became, as I thought, unconscious. I knelt beside her, raising her head with my right hand, and brokenly besought her to speak to me when I would at once do anything she demanded. But she gave no sign of animation. In a frenzy of despair I forced myself to examine her injuries, and my heart nearly stopped beating when I discovered that a large piece of iron had been driven into her brain through the back of her head. I knew in a moment that she was dead. Although I have not had much experience of that terrible epoch in the human being, I have seen far too much of death in animal life not to know that she who had been my honored and respected wife now lay before me a mere soulless entity, a symbol only of the splendid vital creature who, a minute earlier, was angrily protesting against the supposed faithlessness of her mate. Looking back now upon the events of that fateful night, I marvel at the appalling coolness which came to my aid as soon as I realized the extent of the misfortune which had befallen both Alice and myself. I can fully understand what is meant by the callousness of a certain class of criminals, or the indifference to inevitable death betrayed by Eastern races. No sooner was I quite assured that my wife was dead, dead beyond hope or doubt, than I regained the use of my reasoning faculties in the most marvellously cold-blooded degree. The actual difficulties of my position were enormous. I arraigned myself before the judge and jury, and saw clearly that every circumstance which contributed to Alice's suspicion in the first instance were now magnified 100-fold by the manner and scene of her death. Before me, in ghostly panorama, moved the dread crowd of witnesses against me, the degradation of my family, the bitter and vengeful feelings of my wife's relatives, the suffering of poor, unconscious Mrs. Hillmer, the whole avalanche of horror and misery which this unfortunate accident had precipitated upon every person who claimed my relationship or friendship. My mental attitude was quite altruistic. Could I have undone the past, I would cheerfully have undergone a painful and protracted death forthwith. But no possible atonement on my part would restore Alice to life. I knew it was quite improbable that I should be convicted of murdering her, strong as the circumstantial testimony against me must be. The mere legal consequences did not, however, weigh with me for a second. From that awful hour I felt that I was doomed personally. My only thought was to seek oblivion, not only for myself but for all whom Alice's death might affect. Reasoning in this way, I rapidly resolved to make a bold effort to conceal forever the time and place of the fatality. If I failed, I could tell the truth. If I succeeded, I might at my own expense save a vast amount of unnecessary sorrow. The desperate expedient came to me of carrying off the body to the untenanted house at Putney where my old master had resided until his death, utilizing the four-wheeled cab with its half-drunken driver for the purpose. If I reached Putney unhindered, I could dispose of my terrible burden easily, for the river flowed past the grounds, and every inch of the locality was known to me. It occurred to me that perhaps the body might be found and recognized. Our personal linen was never marked, by reason of the fact that our laundry work was done upon our Yorkshire estate, but as a temporary safeguard I resolved to take some different and less valuable outer clothes from Mrs. Hillmer's residence. Her maid was of a similar build to my wife, so I hastened to the girl's room and laid hands upon a soiled coat and skirt which were relegated to the recesses of the wardrobe. I glanced at my watch as I came along the corridor. It was 6:15 p.m. All the incidents I have related to you had happened within a quarter of an hour. Oh, heaven! It seemed longer than all the preceding years of my life. Having resolved upon a line of conduct, I pursued it with the sang-froid and accuracy of one of the superior scoundrels delineated by Du Boisgobey. The door to the flat was locked. If the servants, hardly due yet, returned unexpectedly, I would send them off to Victoria Station on some imaginary errand of their mistress's. I knelt beside my poor wife's body once more, and with great difficulty took off her costume and loosely fastened on the maid's garments. In her purse there were some bulky documents, which I afterwards discovered to be the reports furnished by a firm of private detectives, detailing all my movements with reference to Raleigh Mansions with surprising accuracy. But she had concealed her name. These men themselves only knew me as Colonel Montgomery. How Alice first came to suspect me I can only guess. Perhaps my indifference, my absence from home at definite hours, a chance meeting at the street unknown to me, any of these may have supplied the initial cause, and led her to verify her doubts before taxing me with my supposed iniquity. Indeed, her final act of coming alone to Mrs. Hillmer's abode revealed her fearless spirit and independent methods. She wanted no divorce court revelations. She would simply have spurned me as an unworthy and dishonorable wretch. Her small belongings I put in my pockets, the clothes I made into a parcel and stuffed temporarily beneath my overcoat. Then I unlocked the door and went down the few steps to the main entrance. There was no one about, the fog and sleet having cleared the street, a quiet thoroughfare at all times. I took the risk of the maid's coming back, and I ran to the square for my conveyance. The driver had been improving the occasion, and was more inebriated than before. He brought his cab to the door, and I knew by the appearance of things that no one had entered during my absence. With some difficulty I lifted Alice's body into my arms in as natural a position as possible, and carried her to the cab, leaving the door of the flat ajar. Luck still favoured me. The cabman supposed that she, like himself, was intoxicated. A man came down the opposite side of the street, but he paid not the slightest heed to me, and indeed we were but dimly visible to each other. Exerting all my strength unobtrusively, I placed my wife on the rear seat, and then calmly gave the driver instructions. He grumbled at the distance, but I told him I would pay him handsomely. Searching in my pockets and Alice's purse, I could only find 12 shillings, so although it was risky to avoid quarrel with the man, I determined to give him a £5 note. Thus far all had gone well. The notion possessed me that, to all intents and purposes, I had murdered my wife, and that I was now disposing of the visible signs of my guilt in the most approved manner of a daring criminal. Whether I did right or wrong I cannot, even at this late hour, decide. Should my death induce forgetfulness, I am still inclined to think that I acted for the best. My wife was dead, I was self-condemned. Why then allow others, wholly innocent, to be dragged into the vortex? This was my line of thought. If you, reading this ghastly narrative, shudder at my deeds, I pray you nevertheless to weigh in the balance of good and ill that resulted from my actions. At last we reached Putney, and drew up at the end of the disused lane which runs down by the side of the house to the river. Here again the road was deserted. I lifted my wife out, carried her to the postern gate, and returned to give the driver his note. The man was so amazed at the amount that he whipped up his horse instantly, fearing lest I should change my mind. I was about to force open the old and rickety door into the garden when I remembered the drain pipe jutting into the Thames, a place where, as a child, I often caused much alarm by surreptitious visits for the purpose of catching minnows. I quickly took off my coat and boots, turned up my trousers and shirt sleeves, and examined the pipe with my hands. It exactly suited my purpose. In half a minute I had firmly wedged my wife's body beneath it. This was the most horrible portion of my task. The chill water, the desolation of the river bank, the mud and trailing weeds, all these things seemed so vile and loathsome when placed into contact with the mortal remains of my ill-fated Alice. She had loved me. I believe I loved her, as I assuredly do now when her presence is but a memory. Yet I was condemned to commit her to the contaminating beastliness of such surroundings. It was a small matter in the face of death, but it has weighed on me since more than any other feature of that cruel night's history. Before leaving Putney, I tied her clothes, hat and furs to a couple of heavy stones and threw the parcel into deep water. By train and cab, I reached home but a few minutes late for dinner. It was not difficult for me to act my part with the servants, nor keep up the farce during the weary days that followed. My consciousness was so seared by what I had gone through that the mere make-believe of my position was a relief to me. That night, in the privacy of my room, I recollected the broken fender, and feared lest the ironwork would supply a clue should the body be discovered, a thing I deemed practically impossible. But for Mrs. Hillmer's sake I took no risk. Next morning, before I saw you at Tattersall's, I made arrangements for the whole contents of her drawing room to be transferred to her brother's flat, where, to my knowledge, the articles were needed. Mrs. Hillmer had gone out early, so the thing was done in her absence. Her amazement was so great that she wired me, using as a signature the pet name of her childhood, and this was the first message you heard the groom refer to when he came the second time with the telegram from Richmond. I wrote her a hurried note, explaining that I intended the transfer as a sop to her offered brother, but she had telegraphed again, and I had to go to see her to learn that Mensmore resented the gift and had gone off in a huff to Monte Carlo. A little later I took the supreme step of writing a farewell letter. Since my wife's death I could not bear to meet any other woman. I communed with my poor Alice more when dead than when alive. I do not think I have anything else to tell you. Step by step I watched you and the police tearing aside my barrier of deceit. At times I thought I would baffle you in the end. Were it not for my folly in bribing Jane Harding, I think I must have succeeded. That poor girl was the undoing of me in the first instance, and she now has brought me my final sentence, for she came to-day and told me with tears all that had happened between the detective and herself. White, too, put in an appearance. To-morrow, I suppose, he will bring a warrant, if you do not see him first and tell him the truth. Do not misunderstand me. I am glad of this release. When you strove to arouse me from my despair, I did, for a little while, cherish the hope that I might be able to devote my declining years to the work which Alice herself took an interest in. But the web of testimony woven round my old friend Mensmore, the self-effacing spirit of his sister, who, to shield me, was willing to sacrifice herself, the possibility that I might involve these two, and perhaps others, in my own ruin, every circumstance conspired to overwhelm me. I can endure no more, my dear Bruce. It is ended. The past is already a dream to me, the future void. My poor nature was not designed to withstand such a strain. The cord of existence has snapped, and I cannot bring myself to believe it will be mended again. In bidding you farewell, I ask one thing. If you take a charitable view of my deeds, if you consider that my penalty is commensurate with my faults, then you might take my dead hand and say, "This was my friend. I pity him. May the spirit of his wife be merciful unto him, should they meet in the regions beyond the grave." And so, for the last time, I sign myself, Charles Dyke. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. This audiobook recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Valedictory. Much as Bruce would have wished to inter his dead friend's secret with his mortal remains in the tomb, it was impossible. Sir Charles Dyke's sacrifice must not be made in vain, and the strange chain of events encircled other actors in the drama too strongly to enable the barrister to adopt the course which would otherwise have commended itself to him. An early visit to Scotland Yard, where in company with Mr. White he interviewed the Deputy Commissioner, and conference with the District Coroner settled two important questions. The police were satisfied as to the cause of Lady Dyke's death, and the coroner agreed to keep the evidence as to the baronet's sudden collapse strictly within the limits of the medical evidence. A wholly unnecessary public scandal was thus avoided. With Lady Dyke's relatives his task required considerable tact. Without taking them fully into his confidence, he explained that Sir Charles had all along known the exact facts bearing upon her death and burial place, but for family reasons he thought it best not to disclose his knowledge. Bruce needed their cooperation in getting the Home Office to give the requisite permission for Lady Dyke's reburial. The circumstance that the deceased baronet had left his estates to his wife's nephew, joined to the important position Bruce occupied as one of the trustees and joint guardian with the boy's mother of the young heir, smoothed over many difficulties. After a harassing and anxious week, Bruce had the melancholy satisfaction of seeing the remains of the unfortunate couple laid to rest in the stately gloom of the family vault. The newspapers, of course, scented a mystery in the proceedings, but definite inquiry was banned in every direction. Even the exhumation order gave no clue to the reasons of the authorities for granting it, and in less than the proverbial 9 days the incident was forgotten. Sir Charles had made it a condition precedent to the succession that his heir should bear his name and should live with his widowed mother on the Yorkshire estate or in the town house for a certain number of months in each year until the boy was old enough to go to school. This stipulation was intended to have the effect of more rapidly burying his own memory in oblivion. Bruce, too, was given a sum of £5,000 to be expended in bequests as he thought fit. Claude understood his motive thoroughly. Jane Harding had been loyal to her master in her own way, so he arranged that she should receive an annual income sufficient to secure her from want. Thompson, too, was provided for when the time came that he was too feeble for further employment at Portman Square, and Mr. White received a handsome douceur for his services. Mrs. Hillmer did not even know of Sir Charles Dyke's death until weeks had passed. Acting on Bruce's advice, her brother simply told her that everything had been settled, and that the authorities concurred with the barrister in the opinion that Lady Dyke was accidentally killed. When she had completely recovered from the shock of the belief that her loyal friend had murdered his wife, Mensmore one day told her the whole sad story, but he would allow no more weeping. "It is time," he said, "that the misery of this episode should cease. When the chief actor in the tragedy gave his life to end the suffering, we would but ill meet his wishes by allowing it to occupy our thoughts unduly in the future." Mensmore's marriage with Phyllis Browne was now definitely fixed for the following autumn, so he carried his sister off with him on a hasty trip to Wyoming in company with Corbett, a journey required for the protection and development of their joint interests in that state. Not only did their property turn out to be of great and lasting value, but during their absence the Springbok mine began to boom. Even the cautious barrister one day found himself hesitating whether or not to sell at half over par, so excellent were the reports and so extensive the dividends from that auriferous locality. The two young people were married, a scion of the house had become a lusty 2-year-old, Mr. White had become chief inspector, and Miss Marie le Marchant had, by strenuous effort, risen to the dignity of double-crown posters as a dashing comédienne, when Bruce's memories of his lost friends were suddenly revived in an unexpected manner. Mr. Sydney H. Corbett came to him, with measured questionings and brooding thought stamped on his brows. "It's like this," he said, when they were settled down to details. "I want to get married." "To whom?" inquired Claude, wondering at the savage tone in which the announcement was made. "To Mrs. Hillmer." "Oh!" "That's what everybody yells at the moment I mention it. She screams 'Oh!' and runs off with tears in her eyes. Her brother says 'Oh!' and looks uncomfortable, but refuses to discuss the proposition. Now you say 'Oh!' and gaze at me like an owl at the bare statement. What the dickens does it all mean, I want to know? I'm not worrying about what happened years ago. Mrs. Hillmer's just the sort of woman I require as a wife, and I'll marry her yet if the whole British nation says 'Oh!' loud enough to be heard and answered by the United States." "That's the proper sort of spirit in which to set about the business." "Yes, sir, but I can't get any forwarder. There's a kind of rock below water which holds me up every time I shoot the rapids. She likes me well enough, I know. She calls me Sid, as slick as butter, and I call her Gwen, but there you are, if I want to go ahead a bit she pulls up and weeps. Now why the—" "Steady, Mr. Corbett. Women weep for many reasons. Do you know her history?" "No, and I don't want to." "But perhaps that is exactly what she does want. Remember that she has been married before, with somewhat bitter experience. She probably believes that a husband and wife should have no secrets from each other. Above all else, there should be no cloud between them as to bygone events. Mrs. Hillmer is highly sensitive. If she imagined you were under any misapprehension as to the circumstances under which Sir Charles and Lady Dyke met their deaths, do not forget you were personally mixed up in the affair, she would neither entertain your proposal nor explain her motives. She would just do as you say, run away and cry." "Well, now that beats everything," said Corbett admiringly. "That never struck me before." "It is the probable explanation of her attitude, nevertheless." "Then what am I to do?" "Write to her. Ask her permission to learn the facts from me. Tell her you believe you understand the reasons for her reticence, and that your only excuse for the request is that you want to go to her on an equal plane of absolute confidence. It seems to me—" "That I'd better get quick and do it?" shouted Corbett, vanishing with the utmost celerity. Bruce still occupied his old chambers in Victoria Street. He did not expect to see Corbett again for a couple of days. To the barrister's utter amazement he returned within 10 minutes. "Fire away," he cried excitedly. "You struck it first time. I just rang her up." "Rang her up?" "Yes. She's staying at the Savoy for a few days, so I telephoned from the Windsor. I could never fix up a letter in your words, you know, but switch me on the end of a wire and I know where I am." "What on earth did you say?" "As soon as I got her in the box at the other end, I said, 'Is that you, Gwen?' 'Yes,' said she. 'Well,' said I guess you know who's talking.' 'Quite well,' said she. 'Then,' said I've just been telling Mr. Bruce I wanted to marry you, and that you wouldn't even discuss the proposition. He said you probably wished me to know the whole story of Sir Charles Dyke, but felt kinda shy of telling me yourself. He will get it off his chest if you give him permission, and then I can come along in a hansom and fix things. What do you say?' There was no answer, so I shouted, 'Are you there?' And she said, 'Yes,' faint like. 'Don't let me hurry you,' said I, 'but if you agree straight away I can catch Bruce at home, for I've just left him.' With that she said, 'Very well. You can see Mr. Bruce.' And here I am. Having accomplished the whole thing satisfactorily. As how? Don't you see you have proposed to the lady and practically been accepted? Jeesh, it does look something like it. Say, I'm off. This story of yours will keep until tomorrow. He would have gone, but Bruce jumped after him. Not so fast, Mr. Corbett. You must not sail into the Savoy flying a false flag. Kindly oblige me with your attention for the next half hour. With that, he unlocked the safe and took from his recesses Sir Charles Dyke's confession. He read the whole of its opening passages, explaining the relations between Mrs. Hillmer and her unfortunate but abiding friend. The straightforward, honest sentences sounded strangely familiar at this distance of time. Bruce was glad of the opportunity of reading them aloud. It seemed a fitting thing that this testimony should come, as it were, from the tomb. Corbett listened intently to the recital and to the barrister's summary of the events that followed. "Poor chap," he said, when the sad tale had ended. "I hope you shook hands with him as he asked you to do." "I did. Would that my grasp had the power to reassure him of my heartfelt sympathy." For a little while they were silent. "So," said Corbett at last, "Gwen thought I would make the same mistake as the poor lady and suspect her wrongfully." "No, not that. But naturally she wished the man whom she could trust as a husband to be wholly cognizant of events in which already he had participated slightly." "She was right. I like her all the better for it. But tell me, is there any necessity for that wonderful document to be preserved?" "Not the slightest. It has served its last use." "Then put it in the fire." Bruce did not hesitate a moment to comply with the wish. The flames devoured the record with avidity, and the two men watched the manuscript crumbling into nothingness. Then Corbett said, "I must be off to the Savoy." "Good bye, old chap," said Bruce. "And good luck to you, too. I congratulate both Mrs. Hillmer and yourself." End of chapter 31. End of A Mysterious Disappearance by Louis Tracy. Read by Carolyn. Thanks for listening.